Hello and welcome. These beginning slides are mostly for your reference, and they are all referenced to the script as well to make referring to back and forth easier. We're going to go over everything in a lot more detail in a very in-depth video, but there's a few pre-set up things that I do need to highlight, as well as to just show you the general plan for implementation. So again, everything is referenced, but there will be 3 files that will be loaded onto the Pico that effectively just .ps1 files effectively. This is the plan for the Ducky script itself and what it's going to implement in order. Now, the key points to highlight here are the MITM setup. So it did require a bit of signing with the root CA that we'll install onto their device with the Pico, and then append that to MITM proxy so that the proxy interception was trusted by the host computer. And there was also a website that involved being needed to be set up as well. We're going to be using a root CA to re-navigate a user to a fake website. So essentially, we're going to start by creating the root CA, which I've done earlier and obfuscated the naming by calling it Microsoft Update. We would then monitor the traffic and decide which website the user visited that we would want to redirect them to our version of. However, I have pre-cooked in the oven a few earlier and just decided to go for eBay. But you would follow the same process. You would create the certificate and then you would sign it with the root CA that you'd made that will be installed via the Pico on the target device. So also on the Pico is going to be Windows Update.ps1, which is essentially the reverse shell. We are then going to have task service.ps1, which is going to make that persistent, along with a bit of Ducky script, a little workaround I had to get going. And then we're going to have a startup ping so that when the user logs on, it just sends a ping so that we could monitor that here and we would know that the device is turned on and we could then start the 444. And it's in a loop, so it will connect. We'll demonstrate that as well. And then at the end of it, we're just going to do a little bit of a cleanup to try and erase any history. So with those essential things on the Ducky complete, which will help the Ducky script as it runs make a little bit more sense, we're going to plug the Ducky in and we're going to watch it load. So it's going to start by booting into admin PowerShell. It's then going to turn off Windows Defender. After turning off Windows Defender, it's going to go through the execution bypass policy. I might repeat that in other steps as well, just to make sure that certain things do it, but it was essential to do an individual process to do that as well. So that's Defender running, that's the execution bypass running. It is then now going to copy the Windows update to System32, which is the reverse shell. So then it's going to run task service, where it's got the ping and it's going to run that reverse shell as scheduled task. This is quite a big workaround, but basically I had a little bit of a problem with initially kicking off my reverse PowerShell. So I've done it in a way that there's a 30-second delay so that once this is all done and it closes, it then opens and runs effectively. So then after that, it is booting up the CA onto the drive, re-enabling Windows Defender, and then running the cleanup policy, and then it will exit itself. Okay, and then that takes us to here. So that flash was it going, and we can now see that it's connected. So the ping would only happen when the user actually signs on, but we now have remote shell access. So with this reverse shell, we're going to use it to set up a proxy in order to monitor the traffic of the user, which is a bit of reconnaissance to find out which website we might want to target. So we're going to first just set it up under my IP with 8080 being the port, and then we're going to do a quick verification check to ensure that it has been set up correctly. So we can now see that the proxy enable and the proxy server are running, which we can run through MITM proxy, which will allow us to see the websites the user is going to unencrypted. So if they then open up Firefox and they go to ebay.com, we will now be able to see all the traffic that they is routing through them. So for example, we can see eBay there. And we would do this over time as reconnaissance to decide which website we wanted to visit. So a little bit of a side note that I did think was quite interesting. The first time I ever booted this up, I saw Facebook in there, brand new VM, never touched the internet, and there, for some reason, was Facebook. I'm not sure what that tells us about their extent of their data gathering, but there we go. So once that's done and we've done the reconnaissance stage, we would need our HTTPS server, which is pre-set up, which will be running on here. We would then need to regenerate a certificate specifically for the website we were targeting. Again, I've done a couple earlier, eBay, and we would sign those with the root CA that is installed on the laptop that I'm using, which is a separate device to the Kali. So that was installed via the Pico, and we can just use that to sign for any website that we decide to target. So with that set up, you would then also obviously need a fake website for them to redirect to for whatever your purposes are, whether it be banking or Bitcoin. But for argument's sake, this time we're just going to use eBay. So there would effectively that would be the reconnaissance stage, and then there would be the preparation stage. And the preparation stage would be setting up the HTTPS server or CSU infrastructure if you were very, very serious. Also creating the certificates that I showed earlier in order to sign them with the root certificate installed via the Pico, and then of course setting up the fake website, which would be redirecting the user to them for a malicious purpose. So in this instance, we can see that using the getting the hosts in system 32, we can see that there's nothing present. So once we'd done all of that, we would need to basically enter the attack phase once everything was set up and ready to go. So that would involve here installing the websites that we have as hosts, which would basically be the redirecting. So if we kick that off and then we can check that those are live, we can see that that is now done. And those will be using the certificates that we've signed with the root user certificate. So there is a bit of what was initially a bug actually in that I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get the redirect to happen. And essentially because I still had the Meetum proxy open on port 8080, it was just forcing everything through port 8080, which was continually taking it to the legitimate website. But I actually found out a way that I can make that work in my favor because I can get everything set up and ready to go. So the server's done, those are on there. There's no rush. The user can still be browsing as normal. And then all we need to do is disable the proxy. So to just showcase that a little bit, I think if we, even with those up, with the proxy running, with the proxy value at 1, if they go back to ebay.com and they're browsing, they're going to go to the proper site, which is not loading. There we go. Okay, so they're going to the proper site. Now, if we actually make sure that the HTTP server is running properly, we can then turn off the proxy by turning the value to 0. And immediately after that, we are going to force close and clear the cache of Firefox. And the reason we're doing that is to mimic a kind of bug effectively. So we're going to clear the value to clear the way for the redirect. We're then going to post in that. And as I send off that, it's going to force close on Windows, hopefully without too much of a delay. There we go. Ideal. Okay. So now that's done, the user will be a bit like, oh, okay, why is that just closed? That's a bit weird. I know. I'll reopen Firefox, just about to buy myself a swanky new pair of shoes. Okay, I'll take myself to eBay. Oh, I know, auto redirected. Didn't even have to type it. So that is the fake eBay. So the user's like, oh, okay, well, it just closed. Maybe I'll put in my details again. And then let's see, let's get myself. So this is where, I had to type that, but this is where you would then also we'll have the same clear clash close browser, but also the remove the redirect all in one command line that we would push through the shell. And effectively, what we'd be doing on our end is just sitting with that there ready, and we would be watching our HTTP server. And as soon as that user presses enter, they're like, no, I don't want to save my password. We've seen it there, right in. And as soon as we see that, boom, force closed, cleared again. They're a bit like, what is going on today? Then the server's closed. Meet and proxy, I think it's worth finding out if we'd have to like quickly paste in proxy as well, but I think just shutting down the server would possibly redirect you back to the normal website because we've cleared it. We've cleared the from the actual files itself, so it redirects back to there. And the reason is because in that same file, if we were to go back and just fetch which websites are loaded in there, it's been automatically cleared out from there from the hosts. Sorry, when I'm doing several things, words sometimes escape me. So we can see that that's now cleared from localhost. I would just like to highlight very quickly as well, because in the heat of the operation, somewhat didn't point it out, but it's www.ebay.com at the top with a tick. And that's the thing that might really trick someone into entering their password there. So, how was the CIA triad impacted by this attack? In terms of confidentiality, it's probably the reverse shell, the MIT and web proxy that we used to monitor their web traffic, and when we redirected them to the fake website. In terms of integrity, it was compromised when the root CA was installed, when it was redirected to the fake website, and also when we used the scheduled tasks. In terms of availability, that was impacted when they couldn't access the legitimate eBay website, and also when we were consuming resources on their computer. So we're going to move to the Meteor framework and mitigations. So for the initial access, obviously we used the Pico, and there were a couple of things there that relatively high level, but if they were implemented, could have prevented the attack from taking place in the first place. Trusted relationships also, because CA certificates are trusted, so we exploited that trust by putting a CA certificate onto their drive through the Pico. And once that's installed, there isn't really a mitigation for that. So in terms of defense evasion, turning off Windows Defender, there's a couple of ones there that are more aimed at businesses, to be fair. And I have highlighted in bigger depth, but unfortunately I'm a little bit constrained on time, so I have to sort of fly through them a little bit. But even a average user, if they didn't use admin and they put in some restrictions on how you could use PowerShell and what you could and could not disable, that could also have prevented a fair amount of this from taking place. So in terms of persistence, it was the scheduled tasks that I used, which was T1053, which was for the shell and the ping. And there's 3 out of the lot that I've identified that theoretically could have done that, but no average user is very likely to have had those on their system. In terms of execution, we've got the PowerShell T1059. There's quite a few that I found, to be fair, restrictions that you can put around PowerShell, probably because it does have effectively control over your entire system. So to be able to place restrictions on those and stop certain things from happening, especially for businesses, are going to be essential. Collection, that was the closest one that I found, adversary in the middle. Obviously, we use a kind of man in the middle proxy attack to do the reconnaissance and gather the data about what websites they visit. And that was the closest one there, to be honest, and no mitigation for that based on how I'd done it. So I also put the internal proxy in command and control because that was the closest actual label that fitted the implementation of how I did it. But again, there were no mitigations for that. So the remote access control, which is what effectively was the closest that I could find for the reverse shell, there were no specifically listed mitigations in that section, which did make me think it wasn't the perfect one, but in command and control, that was the best that I could find. However, there were a few that carried over from my observation from scheduled tasks that if they were implemented, it still would have mitigated that. In terms of exfiltration, I used a HTTP server, which was kind of like a little bit of a C2 channel-ish, but obviously you'd get caught. But considering I'm a second-year student, it's kind of C2 infrastructure. There were no relevant mitigations for that in the way that that was implemented either. And in terms of a user mitigation, two-factor authentication would stop it at the end.